Seismic Lab. Labradors are lousy watchdogs. They usually bark when there is a stranger about, but it is an expression of unmitigated joy at the chance to meet somebody new, not a warning. Norman Strung. Our dog Dylan was a lousy watchdog. He was a large lab mix and had the potential to be intimidating. But instead of barking when strangers came to the door, he'd greet them with an eager wag of his tail. One night, my husband Craig left Dylan in our van parked by the ice arena where Craig was playing hockey. Dylan was happy hanging out in the van. He always jumped in as soon as we opened a door, never wanting to be left behind. And Craig figured the presence of a big dog would be a better deterrent to would-be thieves than a car alarm. When Craig came out of the arena near midnight, he was surprised to see Dylan running loose around the parking lot. It took Craig a moment to register that the van was gone. Not only had Dylan not deterred the car thieves, he must have happily jumped out of the van to greet them when they forced open a door, which was just as well because we'd rather have lost the van than Dylan. Despite Dylan's failing as a guard dog, we soon learned that he had the ability to raise an alarm of a different kind. From the time we first adopted Dylan from a local animal shelter, he slept in a crate in our bedroom. When Dylan wasn't yet house-trained, we locked him in a crate at night. Later, we kept the door open, and Dylan would head into the crate on his own as soon as Craig and I began preparing for bed. The crate became a place of sanctuary and security for Dylan. Whenever anyone mentioned the word bath, Dylan instantly hid in his crate. It was, therefore, out of character one night when Dylan refused to go into his crate. We pushed and coaxed, but he would not get inside. Instead, he slept on the floor at the foot of our bed. The next night was the same. Coincidentally, shortly before this episode, I had been doing some research into the behavior exhibited by animals before earthquakes. I had read that birds often stop singing moments before a quake hits, and that dogs and cats have been known to avoid enclosed spaces, even to the point of running away from home, over a period of 3 days before an earthquake. On the third night that Dylan refused to go into his crate, I pointed out to my husband that Dylan might be displaying pre-earthquake behavior. "That would mean we should get an earthquake tomorrow," Craig said, half intrigued, half laughing. We both went to sleep without giving it much further thought. The next morning, around 11 a.m., an earthquake hit. I was in the community center swimming pool with my daughter at the time, and we didn't feel it, but the rest of the city did. It was a small quake, with no damage reported, but it did give people a bit of a scare. As one woman interviewed on the local news said, it was like standing on Jell-O. That night, Dylan returned to his normal pattern of happily bedding down in his crate, and Craig and I went to bed with a new feeling of security. Dylan might be a lousy watchdog when it came to burglars and car thieves, but when the next earthquake hits, we'll be ready. Jacqueline Pierce. Second chances. Go forward confidently, energetically, attacking problems, expecting favorable outcomes. Norman Vincent Peale. "Mom, can we get a dog for Christmas?" my daughter Piper asked. "We already have 2 dogs, honey." "But she's so cute." Piper thrust her laptop screen in my face, and the dog's oversized gremlin-like ears elicited an awe from me. Piper smiled, now hopeful. "Well, I certainly give her cute," I admitted. "But we can't handle another dog. Besides, getting a dog as a gift is never a good idea. It's impulsive, and most of these dogs, I know, end up in shelters." Piper knew this spiel from my previous dog rescue days. "But we'd never do that, right?" "That's right. I'll take care of her, I promise." How many kids make that promise, only to ignore the dog once the novelty wears off? Wasn't that a common excuse for dumping dogs at the shelter? I raised my brows. "Mom, I will, I promise." Piper pulled up a second photo of the red and white corgi named Penny, and her stubby legs and soft brown eyes tugged at my heart. I must resist, I reminded myself. I needed to identify a fault, so I scrutinized the picture. "Look," I pointed to her backside, "she doesn't have a tail." "Mom, Pembroke Welsh corgis don't have tails. That makes them even cuter." Piper flashed another photo of a corgi lying frog dog style with a full view of its thick furred haunches. They call their butts corgi pants. Isn't that funny? Hilarious, but the answer's still no. The Queen of England has corgis. My affinity for all things British weakened my resolve. Really? Piper said, Yep. Luckily, my sensibility immediately resurfaced. No third dog. Period. End of discussion. I turned toward the kitchen to prepare dinner. Penny's a rescue. She had to go and say the R word, I sighed. Pepper could sense I was softening, so she brought it on home. Mom, doesn't every dog deserve a second chance? As an advocate for shelter dogs, how many times had I said those same words? Yes, they do, but it will have to be someone else who gives it to her. We have our hands full with Frodo and Dexter. It wouldn't be fair to Penny. Did I really believe that? She'd have knowledgeable and responsible dog owners, an established pack family, and a loving forever home. What was my real hang-up? Piper sulked in her chair throughout dinner. She talked about becoming a vet or a dog trainer. Maybe Penny was just what she needed, a dog of her own. After dinner, I went into my office to work, but I was moved by Penny's plight. Her heartbreaking story unfolded on the internet. A puppy mill survivor. She was terrified of noises, daily activity, and people. She would require much patience and training. I recalled my days in greyhound rescue, fostering the abused and neglected ex-racers, and the miracles that had occurred with consistency, gentleness, and love. Why had I stopped fostering anyway? Time? No. Effort? No. Burnout? Yes. I'd simply lost faith in mankind, and the sadness had overwhelmed me. As Christmas neared, Piper no longer mentioned Penny, but she didn't have to. The little dog still needed a home for the holidays, and I knew we could provide the love and understanding she'd need to recover from her past trauma. But was I ready to jump into such an emotional commitment again? After much reflection, I decided to apply for her adoption and surprise Piper if our application was accepted. We interviewed with Linda, the founder of the adoption group, and she believed us to be a good match for Penny. Dexter and Frodo accepted her into their pack without incident during the mandatory home visit. A few days later, Penny had a new home for the holiday. Spending the first few months in various hidey holes throughout our house, Penny slinked into the kitchen for meals, only to retreat back into the darkness. She ducked her head and crouched whenever we reached to pet her. At times we sat in the closet entryway, speaking her name softly and reassuringly, hoping to gain her trust. We allowed her to set the parameters of our interaction, how much and how long. The phrase, "Where's Penny?" became our household mantra. While I pulled Penny out of the nooks and crannies of our home to take her outside each evening, Penny pulled me deeper into the world of corgi rescue. Hundreds of dogs like Penny hid out of fear, and I could no longer hide from my duty to help them. It started slowly with monetary donations, attending adoption affairs such as meet and greets, and supporting corgi fundraising events. We connected with the corgi rescue folks, and Penny started to flourish after Piper enrolled her in obedience training and agility. As our love for Penny grew and we witnessed her healing, I knew I had to offer more. As a professional writer, I had a skill the group could utilize. I'd helped become the voice of those who couldn't speak. I began by writing the text for the rescue's new website. The factual information wasn't sat. The application process, tips on feeding and grooming, agility opportunities, the various dogs available for adoption. I can do this, I thought. Would you be willing to write the dogs' bios for our annual calendar? Linda soon asked me. Wait, bios would require telling the dogs stories, their disturbing histories with the sordid facts of their abuse and neglect before they came into rescue. Facts that I didn't want to hear, stories I didn't have the strength to tell. But how could I say no? It was my chance to give back to the rescue for the love and joy that Penny had brought into our family. Linda provided me with the heart-rending details of the rescued dogs, and I wept as I read of their mistreatment. broken bones, soft tissue damage, heartworm disease, fleas, severe anxiety, and malnutrition, to name a few. There was Sydney, once abandoned, frightened, obese, and suffering from severe tooth decay, who became an AKC canine good citizen and now visits libraries during children's story hour. And Finley, struck by 2 cars while living on the streets, and now chases rabbits in his backyard and provides love to his adoptive family. Grits spent the first 14 months of his life in a crate because his family had no time for him, but once in rescue, earned his Master Agility Champion title and the myriad accolades that followed because Linda saw promise in his athleticism and intelligence. As I spun each dog's yarn for others to read, the Corgi's mental and physical scars were swiftly counterbalanced by their successes. These dogs had been offered a second chance, and I marveled at their adaptability and fortitude. Today, their histories of cruelty and neglect no longer make me cry. Each year, as the calendar season commences, I sit down to the gut-wrenching facts and craft stories of hope that offer people a glimpse into the dog's strength and perseverance, the miracle of dog rescue. And just like Penny, I've been given a second chance. Kathy Lamarck. Gift of the Shepherd. Mirth can be a major tool for insight, changing ha-ha to aha. Author unknown. As I completed one holiday chore after another, my neck and shoulders began to ache from stress. I heard music drifting out of every store at the mall. A male voice crooned, "Chestnuts roasting on an open fire." The holiday spirit filled my heart, but my body needed a hot soak in the tub. My fingertips read the braille list that I pulled from my pocket. I visualized mountainous displays of clothes and toys to our left and right, with my guide dog Misty leading the way. The mall madness did seem a bit more manageable. Still, shoppers asked if they could pet my German Shepherd, even though her harness sign read, "Please do not pet me, I'm working." She eased me between the crowds while I imagined their outstretched hands. Finally, my list grew shorter as the bags grew heavier. Back home, some chores disappeared from the list while new chores were added. My husband Don and I had decorated our tree. The lights and ornaments were spaced perfectly. No Charlie Brown tree for us. Why were we so obsessed with our decorations? We dressed the tree as though Martha Stewart would stop by. Don and I had wrapped the presents and placed them beneath the tree. For each purchase, we had gone over budget, hoping we chose just the right gift. The next day, ingredients lined our kitchen counter for cookie baking. My guide dog flitted at my feet. Normally at this time of day, we would be returning from our daily walk. Then she loved being brushed. But her grooming routine needed to wait along with the walk. Once again, I felt her cold nose nuzzle my skirt, so my flowered hand waved her away. She brought in her favorite toy and dropped it. I tossed the rubber ring into the next room to keep her out of the kitchen. Who wants dog hair in their cookies? Within minutes, cinnamon and vanilla perfumed our kitchen. I pulled out the first tray of cookies and turned to put them on the table. Our cookie baking reminded me of a factory. My husband, without hesitation, had the next batch going into the oven. The kitchen mess reminded me that we still didn't have any time to relax. A bunch of stamped Christmas cards sat on the table. I still needed to braille a message in each card sent to blind friends. Would I have the time or energy? After this last batch of cookies, I'm going to play with her, I told Don. Suddenly, I could not ignore a loud sound nearby. Crunch! Misty had swiped a cookie off the cooling tray. I used a firm tone of voice. No! The success of our partnership depended on praise and gentle correction from me. Like a child's cry for attention, Misty's mischievous behavior announced her boredom. A few minutes later, I felt guilty for ignoring her. Here's a biscuit, girl, I said, using the treat as a peace offering instead of praise. Then Misty was oddly absent from the kitchen. After being underfoot all morning, I searched the house. When I called her name, I followed the sound of her thumping tail. Her body stretched full length beneath the Christmas tree. As I reached to pet her, my hand felt her dog biscuit. Misty had placed her treat in the manger scene next to the figurine of the Christ child. For the first time that day, I laughed. Misty's gift to me fit perfectly, was suitable for my age, the price was just right, and I did not have to exchange it. Misty reminded me to stop and smell the pine boughs, the blessing of the season. I learned from my furry pal is sharing time with those we love. Carol Chiodo Fleischman. The taxi stops here. You don't learn to walk by following rules. You learn by doing and by falling over. Richard Branson. Nikki was my third child. She was a beautiful blonde little angel. Anita was 4 and Michelle 5, and I worried about jealousy when this new baby entered our lives. Lucky for me, the only jealousy was about who got to play with her and help care for her. My other worry was that we had 2 dogs and 2 cats, all of which had joined our family after our daughters were well past the baby stage. The pups had grown into 2 majestic collies, and the cats, well, they were just 2 ordinary cats. Johnny was a small black and white cat, and Ringo was a huge gray and black striped tabby. The old collie I grew up with lived long enough to help raise our first 2 baby girls, but had passed away. I was pretty confident that my new collies would work out well too, but I'd never had a cat around a newborn baby. I worried about one climbing into the crib or accidentally scratching her. As soon as we brought Nikki home, we saw this was not going to be a problem because the 2 collies would not allow either cat to get close to the baby. One or both stayed on guard next to her 24/7. If I was nursing her, bathing her, or dressing her, one of the dogs would be right there. At night, our golden sable collie, Windsong, slept by her cradle and later under her crib. Tiffany, our black and gold tricolor, slept on the round throw rug, blocking the doorway to the bedroom. Any cat venturing near got a growl and a quick snap. Nikki was a bright, energetic, and happy baby. She seemed to learn a new capability every day. But by the time she was 9 months old, she had not yet tried to take a step on her own. She crawled like a speed demon everywhere. She did pull herself up to stand by the couch or bed, but despite our outstretched arms, she would immediately drop to her hands and knees and crawl to us. While no parent wants to compare children, at times it's hard not to. Michelle had been up and walking at 9 months, Anita by 10 months. I had photos of each taking their first steps. 9 months came and went. Then 10 became 11. Nikki was not walking. I took her to our pediatrician in a panic. What was wrong with my baby girl? She was almost a year old, and she not only did not walk, she refused to even try. The doctor checked her and found absolutely nothing wrong. He assured me that all children walk at different times and that she would walk when she was ready. If she wasn't walking after she turned a year old, he would run more tests. That evening, I discussed my fears with my husband. Nikki was in the playroom with Anita and her ever-present collie nursemaids. Michelle was sprawled on the kitchen floor with her crayons and a coloring book. My husband was trying to reassure me that the doctor was right. Nikki would walk when she was ready. "Why should she walk when she has the taxi?" Michelle piped up, not even looking up from her coloring book. "What do you mean, taxi?" her father asked. Michelle explained that when they were alone playing in the playroom and Nikki wanted to get from one point to another, she just grabbed onto the 2 collies and lifted her legs, and the dog simply carried her wherever she wanted to go. "I've never seen this," I said. "I'm with her all the time." "Mommy," Michelle said, "Nita and me watch her too when you're busy. She does it all the time." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "You never asked," she said solemnly. "But she's doing it right now." My husband and I exchanged glances, then quietly went down the hall to the playroom. We went to the door, which was blocked with a security gate. I gasped in amazement. The 2 collies were trotting in a circle all around the room. Nikki was between the 2 dogs, her little fist clutching tightly to each dog's thick ruff. She had her legs tucked up high and was giggling with delight as the two collies took her around and around the room. Anita was playing with a doll, paying no attention to Nicky and the dogs. I cleared my throat loudly. Nicky immediately let go of the dogs and dropped onto all fours and scuttled across the room to the door, where she sat holding her arms up to me to be picked up. The next day was awful. We took the dogs away from Nicky and put them in the backyard. The first hours were full of Nicky throwing the first tantrums of her young life. Everyone ignored her except for tempting her to walk with favorite toys or cookies. In response to the ruckus Nicky was making, the collies barked, whined, scratched at the back door, and, at last resort, started howling like wolves separated from their cub. Michelle and Anita went out to soothe the dogs. After about 4 hours, Nicky got tired of being ignored and pulled herself up to her feet. To cheers and encouragement from her sisters, she toddled across the room to get a cookie I was holding out as a bribe. When my husband came home from work that evening, she toddled to the door to greet him. He lifted her high in the air and then hugged her. The next day, I let Winsong and Tiffany back in, but watched them closely to make sure there was no further taxi incidences. They went to Nicky and kissed her all over. She showed off for them, walking all around the room. They seemed to know automatically that they were no longer needed for transportation. Winsong went back to sleeping by my bed at night, while Tiffany took on the full nanny burden. If Nicky got close to anything that might hurt her, the big black collie was there in a flash, herding her back to safety and maybe hoping that Nicky would want a lift. But Nicky never hitched a ride again. The doggy taxi was definitely out of business. By Joyce Laird.